I greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. Hello, Bashar.
Well, well, aren't we fancy? And you as well.
I guess I want to know the differences between the ascension, harvest, and advancement.
Between
Ascension, harvest, and advancement.
and advancement,
Yeah. Or
Well-
definitions or...
ascension, again, is simply the raising of your frequency to become more of your true self. Yes?
Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily happen in the blink of an eye, although sometimes it can. It's a process. You're all going through ascension right now, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. So you're raising your frequency and making more things probable in your reality. That's the side effect of continuing to ascend your frequency, to raise your frequency, raise your vibration. That's ascension. Now, of course, when you go into a spirit frame of reference, that's another kind of ascension, but it's still a continuation of the same process. The idea of advancement is, of course, closely connected to that idea. You are expanding, you are growing, you are learning, you are advancing, you are evolving. Similar idea. Harvest can be a slightly different idea. It's possible that that might involve bootstrapping yourself up to a different level entirely by interacting with another version of yourself from another reality or another dimension of experience. Does that make sense to you? Does that translate into your language?
Maybe.
In other words, let's put it this way. Many of the encounters that many of you have with extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings, even though not all of them are this way, will almost always involve what you might call another version of you. Yes? In that reality. A parallel version of you in that reality as one of those beings. Therefore, by interacting and forming a relationship with that being, similar to the way that the channel is forming a relationship with us as a representation of what you might colloquially call his future self, there is a type of harvest going on in that I am lifting him up or helping him to lift up by providing an experience to what you might call my past self that allows him the opportunity to desire a way or find a way to advance and uplift himself. So it's kind of like a bootstrapping phenomena that you can call a type of harvest. Does that make sense?
Kinda.
Now, I understand that in your civilization, sometimes people will refer to the idea of harvesting in a very simple manner of saying, well, a bunch of extraterrestrials are going to come and they're going to pluck us off the planet. They're harvesting us. That's not what we're talking about here. The harvesting we're talking about is the idea of growing yourself in the sense that you want to look at that same term for actually growing wheat or food of some sort, where you allow it to grow, you allow it to ripen, and then it is transformed into something of sustenance that sustains you and allows you to continue. Make sense?
Yeah.
So the idea of harvesting in that sense is that the channel gets benefit, we get benefit, we sustain each other, we help each other grow, it expands us. So harvesting is a mutual agreement for growth and expansion and the transformation of what is learned into something that sustains, perpetuates, guides, and allows for more expansion in much the same way that you grow food to sustain and expand you. Yes?
Okay.
Is this helping at all? Or is this a little bit too esoteric?
I love esoteric, so
All right.
great.
Well, we apologize, but that's the translation.
Can you go into detail of the three-way split mentioned in the raw material, the law of one?
The
three-way split?
the three-way split.
Yes.
The idea simply being that reality is not a duality, it's a trinity. There is the polarity of what you call positive and negative, but there is always the center point of neutrality and balance. Everything is a trinity, not a duality. And as you expand your consciousness, the three-way split from our perspective is simply more awareness of how to use that and remain in the balance point so that you can choose what you prefer without invalidating what you don't. You see more of the positive and more of the negative, but you also see more opportunity to remain in the neutral central space, the balance point, and choose what you prefer while not invalidating what you don't prefer. It's just a neutral observational choice. That's one way to interpret the three-way split. Now, there are other splits happening, as we have described. You are splitting into a multitude of parallel realities, literally, physically. So even though many of you can still see people on your planet, or what appears to be your planet, making choices you would not prefer, it's more now like looking through a glass wall, where you can still see them, but nothing they do can affect you, because it can't reach you through the glass wall. Even though you can see their reality, doesn't mean you're actually still in it. More and more of this splitting will continue to happen until such time, in the years to come, as the splits get farther and farther apart. Those that have chosen a certain way to experience reality will only experience that way, whether it be positive or negative. And everyone will only experience what is reflective of the choice they made for the reality that they gravitate to, and will experience no dichotomy and nothing else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is that answering your question sufficiently?
Well, I guess the raw material mentions there's a service to others split, service to self split, and those who are not polarized to be repeating third density.
Again, the idea is that there's no such thing as a true repeat.
Okay.
That's a choice. You see, perhaps part of what's happening here is that you might be using terminology that's a bit out of date.
Okay.
So the idea is that these old-fashioned ways of describing things don't necessarily represent what's really going on in the mechanism. So the concept of service to self, service to others, is understood in a couple of ways. If you want to talk about that as a split, that's fine, but it's really just a perspective. Those that value service to self above service to others, in a sense, are choosing a more negative way of experiencing the idea, because they are creating a segregational energy. Those that value the idea of service to others will understand the same idea from a more positive direction, because they look at it as a whole system and already realize that service to others is service to self, because you can't be left out of a whole system. Whereas those that experience the idea or perceive the idea or identify the idea as service to self first, in a negative way, are not seeing themselves as part of a whole. They're looking at it in a segregated component sort of orientation. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not important to focus on being your true self. That's not the same thing, because being your true self first is what actually allows you to be of service to others. Because if you're not you, how can you help anybody? So there's a couple of different ways of looking at this concept, some of which are a little bit more aligned with the negative idea, some of which are a little bit more aligned with the positive idea. But it's really about looking at whole systems as opposed to breaking things apart into components. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Another question, why is there so many New Age fluff? I guess there's like a big debate.
New Age
fluff or New Age noise? There's a debate.
Because of what we just said. There's a lot of old-fashioned, outdated, medieval definitions that you've been taught to believe are actually the way to describe the mechanism, and they're not. So it can be very confusing when you don't understand what the real definition is. That's why it's so important to really understand how things work and allow yourself to tell the difference between the wheat and the chaff, the core and the fluff, because the fluff is usually created by a misunderstanding of the definition of what's happening.
So you do prefer the term fourth density over fifth dimension?
Well, it's just another way of describing something, but this is how we look at it. Densities are like the states within a country. Dimensions are like another country. So you are in the fourth dimension, 3 of space, 1 of time. But you have gone from third density and are going into fourth density as an expression of that dimension. But when you actually cross the line from fourth density to fifth density, you will also be simultaneously crossing from the fourth dimension into the fifth. It's just the way these things are lined up vibrationally, that's all.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
That will do.
All right.
Thank you.